Hey, what's up? This is Jake. This week we are stopping in Iowa once again for this week's episode of Whitetail Cribs. It is with Wyatt Cole. Now, Wyatt grew up in kind of a really cool building. It is a shed and a house, so we'll call it a shouse. And it's where they had their lodge, and there is piles and piles and piles of antlers. Some really big deer that were taken in Iowa, and you may even learn who his neighbors were, which is pretty cool. So hope you guys enjoy this episode. If you do, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe. Let's go ahead and get right into it.
Hey guys, I'm Wyatt. Welcome to the lodge. Come on in. So this is the lodge in which my mom and dad built a few years back for the outfitting business that we've been running for about 25 years now. I grew up here in southeast Iowa. Kind of spoiled in some of the best ground that's around Iowa, at least in my opinion. This is kind of our place where we like to, it's our home and where the business was built around and where our hunters stay. So it's a cool place. Everybody gets together, have a good time. So we can start kind of, as you can tell, there's more antlers around here than pretty much anything. We can get into some of them for sure. Like this here is some of the antlers from this year. That main pile there is from one farm last weekend. We're at like 85 something, 85, 86 sheds this year so far. My goal originally was to hit 100 this year, and then after we found 46 last weekend on one farm, it kind of got to like, well, we're gonna get there, but now we're trying to find a bunch of the other sides and we don't know where they're at. So this buck right here was my first bow buck that I actually had a lot of history with. I killed him in 2015. I told my college professors my family was taking me on a big vacation, and they were like, yeah, sure, like go for it. You can take the test when you come back. And I was like, awesome. Well, I'm going to go hunt in southeast Iowa for a few days in November. So it was November 13th when I killed him. It was Friday the 13th too. It was just like this. The wind was blowing like 40 miles an hour, and it was 60 degrees, like not ideal rut conditions at all. And I'd been hunting for several days and hadn't really seen anything. I knew he was here. It was 3 years straight that I had seen him on the farm. I had tons of trail camera pictures of him. And this year, when he was in velvet, we were like, man, he's a giant. Like we've got to figure him out this year. We'd never seen him on the hoof. Every summer he'd come around, we'd get like 1,000 pictures of him, and then he'd just disappear. He was just a ghost. It was 3 days of daylight to dark hunting in the same spot of the farm, and I'm hunting with my buddy Dustin, and this doe comes running out of the cornfield right in front of me, and her tongue's hanging out. You could tell she was definitely beat, and I was like, oh, there's a buck behind him, and Dustin starts rolling on the camera. I pick up my bow, and sure as heck it's him, and we hadn't seen him yet, so we were like, oh, it's what are the odds? So he starts running right at me. He's at like 50 yards, and I come to full draw, and the doe runs under my tree stand, and he stops at like 30 yards, and he was facing me, and I didn't know what to do. I wasn't like super experienced in bow hunting deer yet. Like I'd shot bucks, but I was like, well, it's not a good shot to take by any means. So I just waited, and he came around to the field edge, and at like 15 yards, I got him relatively stopped and took a shot, and he ran, I think 75 yards, and we found him. And dad scared like all the deer off the farm because he was super excited for me, so that was cool. And it was, so after 3 years of trying to chase this buck and actually getting it done was like the coolest thing I think I'd ever experienced in deer hunting for sure. This buck right here, I think it like net scores 190 or really close. It was a buck that was taken by my dad's friend up in Cedar Rapids, actually, and he wanted us to have a replica of the place here. So that's not like actual antlers, but the guy that did the work did a really good job. He grosses like 196. So definitely a really cool deer coming out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa. It doesn't surprise me though. This set right here, like a lot of guys who shed hunt appreciate road sheds. This set of antlers was found just down the road on my dad's friend who's a farmer. I was driving down the highway at like 60 miles an hour with my buddy, and we'd been shed hunting all day, and I was like, dude, that's a set of antlers out there. He's like, no, it's not. And it was like 200 yards off the road, and I went out there and picked him up, and I couldn't believe it. I taped him in the mid-50s, but for a set of road sheds, it's like a shed hunter's dream, and I like shed hunting almost more than I do deer hunting, so I was like, yeah, that's pretty cool. I'm going to hang on to these forever. So those, and they almost looked like they'd been out there for a long time. You can tell they're bleached, but yeah, that was a crazy one. And then this one right here is probably one of the coolest sheds, at least I've ever seen. This shed right here taped 98 inches and I think 4/8. My dad found this back in 1993, just up the road on the farm he grew up on. It was really just a bunch of cattle pasture and timber, but back then nobody really deer hunted. So like I was saying earlier, he was really the only one around with food plots. And when you can do that, you're probably attracting a lot of the deer. This 98 incher, he found a 112 incher on the same farm, I think 2 or 3 years later, then it got stolen. Then I found this one like 5 or 6 years ago on the same farm, and I was kind of like, I wonder if that's the same one. I brought it home, and there's no way it is because it's like 20 years later, but it's really cool to see that they have somewhat of the same genetics. Their G2s end at the same point. They split near the same spot, kind of had the similar beadwork up the main beams. Their veins are kind of in the same area, so you'd think it's probably the same genetics, right? Oh, this buck right here. So this buck was one that one day I found it just on the north end of our property here, and this was when I was way newer into deer hunting, and like growing up, Dad had always told me, like if you let them grow when they're like middle age, they'll grow up to be a lot bigger. So I passed this buck with a muzzleloader when I was 16, and then never saw him again. And then I found these sheds, and I was like, man, I'm never listening to Dad again. Like why did I pass a deer like that? That was my first year filming, so I've got the footage somewhere from like this little Canon handheld, like back before like filming deer hunts was like bigger than it is now. And I filmed him out there with this other buck that I actually have the sheds of. He was fighting this big 6-pointer. It's kind of a cool buck. I found the sheds down in the food plot. He was fighting with him, so he didn't really stand much of a chance. But I passed him up, and then I regretted it, and I stopped doing that because I was like, well, Dad said you should probably pass bucks, and they're like, I thought I knew what like 3 and 4 year old bucks were that scored whatever. And then I learned after a while, if you want to build your experience and become a better bow hunter, you just kind of let arrows fly when you think it's the right time, and eventually you'll build enough experience and be as good as him. But so in here's one of the rooms that Dad definitely takes a lot of pride in. A lot of the bucks over the years that he's shot, starting from down there. That's one of his that highest buck up there, taped I think 170 on the dot at like a couple eighths. It's one of his late muzzleloader bucks. It was pretty cool. He shot that when I was really, really young, and I remember just being really little and like seeing this big deer. It was almost like it was like a prehistoric creature kind of in my eyes at that time, because it was a big bodied buck too. The buck to the left of it, that young buck with the early season coat on him, I shot when I was I think 13, when Dad shot that moose out there up in Canada. I shot that buck. That was my first year ever. My dad's best friend took me deer hunting. I think that was my first that was my first deer hunt ever. And I shot a mid 140s class whitetail with a muzzleloader, and I was immediately hooked. It was cool. My dad's best friend was high-fiving me the whole time and got me all worked up about it. And I remember it like it was yesterday. I almost shot this basket rack buck, and it was still early in the night, early season. They're coming out to feed a lot, and he's like, you should probably just wait a minute. I think there's some good hunting yet, and it looks like there's a deer stepping out. So this buck comes out, and I was like, can I shoot him? And he's like, yeah, go for it. That's a great deer. And I shot him. We didn't find any blood for a while, so I was kind of like all nervous and getting disappointed. And then we actually saw him laying down in the timber like 100 yards away. So we went down there and got him. And then the year later, I shot my first bow buck, which was just a spike out here in the yard before the house was here. We actually had a food plot and some trees, and I shot my first buck with a bow, and it was this little spike that was about that long. But Dad was as happy as if it was a 200-inch deer, so that was really all that mattered to him and me. So then a couple of these other bucks in here are from around the farm, other farms that we lease as well. That's Dad's muzzleloader buck last year. Just an absolute brute of a buck. It was shot just down the road on one of our farms, and he texted me, and he's like, hey, you got to come over here and help me look for blood. I just shot a deer. I was like, and whenever Dad texts me that, I know it's a good one, because he passes bucks like the sheds I just showed you all the time, because he's out for giants. And so we went over there and found him pretty soon. He always makes good shots, so it's pretty easy to find his deer when he shoots them. this buck right here is probably one of the most sentimental deer I think that I have to history. And it was one that I'd found the antlers of, this antler right here actually, back in 2016 I found this antler, and we had a bunch of trail camera pictures of him this year, and he had like this unicorn thing growing out between his other two antlers. So we took all this like footage and we're like, well, we just picked up his shed. We're going to try to definitely get on him in the years to come. You know, hopefully he keeps growing like he is. He's going to be a giant. And I remember saying on the footage, I was like, I'm going to try to shoot this deer in 2020. And then I actually, 2019, after my elk hunt, I tore my meniscus up in the mountains and had surgery. And then after, I think 12 days after surgery, I was walking and running pretty good. So I called Dad. I was like, hey, I'm coming home this weekend. It was November 9th. And I was like, I'm going to come home and climb in a tree. And he's like, you think that's a good idea? And I'm like, it's November and I've been sitting at home a lot. So I'm going to do it, you know. And it was a pretty slow morning. I was hunting at a spot where I'd always seen bucks cruising in November, and there wasn't much happening. My best friend Gabe was texting me because he was supposed to be there, but his flight got delayed, so he couldn't be there. So otherwise we would have had it all on film. But I remember seeing these two bucks come running down the ridge, and they're chasing, like a doe came through earlier. It was like they're chasing her scent trail. And I was like, okay, well, it's picking up a little bit. And then after they go through, I was just sitting there messing around with my camera, and because I shoot photos for fun and for work a little bit. And I'm messing with my camera, and I hear this real soft grunt. And I look behind me, and this buck is standing there, just standing still with a doe. He's 4 or 5 yards from her, just following her around back in the woods, probably 50 yards behind me. And I was like, oh, that's a pretty good buck. You know, I texted Gabe. I was like, hey, there's like a 145-inch 10-pointer walking right at me. Like, it's definitely starting to pick up. And little did I know he's bigger than that, and the buck that he was. So he gets to like 30 yards broadside, and I take these really cool pictures of him with my telephoto lens. And I'm sitting there, and I'm looking at the pictures, and I'm like, yeah, he's pretty big deer, actually. Because he's so tight-framed that I didn't think there was actually much antler there. And he did look kind of big-bodied, so I thought he was old, but I was just having a hard time telling because the ridge dropped off, and it was kind of hard to tell how big he was in comparison of scale from antlers to body. So I pretty much had decided I was passing him. I started taking these photos, and I start sending my buddies these photos. And they're like, dude, that buck's got pretty heavy bases. What are you doing? And then he turns his head and faces away from me. And I was like, man, and they always look bigger when they're walking away, right? So I was like, oh man, I messed up. Well, then the doe comes back around and feeds up in front of me, and she gets to like 30 yards facing me, and he's right behind her. And here come one of those two bucks from earlier in the morning, and it startles him and her, so they start getting all nervous. And the doe takes off running, and he puts his nose to the ground and gets behind her, and he comes swinging by at like 20 yards. I push my camera aside and grab my bow, and I come to full draw. It was like it was in a movie. It happened in like a half a second. And I let one fly at him at like 35 yards. And at first I was like, I totally smoked him, and I thought I heard him crash. And then everything started going through my head like, no, you definitely shot low, or you shot back, or whatever it was. Like, started second guessing myself a lot. So then I sat up there for a few hours, and I was just kind of waiting. And eventually I got down, and I was climbing down my tree stand. I look over, and there's something in the creek, and I grab my binos, and I was like, there he is right there the whole time. So that was cool. Dad was super excited. And then that big buck up there that's my dad's biggest bow buck to date. It ended up taping 186 with the splits, and he was a mainframe 170-inch 8-pointer. Right here's all the pictures of him, actually. I was at an Iowa Hawkeyes football game, so I didn't get to join in on all the fun, but he shot it just down below the house here. He shot it, and he called me, and he's like, hey, I just shot the biggest buck of my life. And it was really, really cool to hear that come from him. And it ended up being a buck of a lifetime for sure, to say the least. This buck right here came from the same farm as that 99-inch shed. And Dad said he saw that buck a lot, and eventually he wasn't going to shoot him, but he came to like 15 yards in the middle of November one day, and he said he had to. He said it's the coolest buck he'd ever seen at that point in time. So, I mean, who's not going to shoot a buck that's got flames for antlers growing up one side? It's just cool how different they get, like super symmetric bucks, like that 10-pointer, all the way to that buck growing, I don't know, 19 or 21 tines over there. It's cool, man. They're capable of so many awesome things and growing in crazy, crazy ways. And this is my dad, the man who taught me everything I know about deer hunting and got me into it. So I'm gonna let him take it from here. He's the expert.
Well, it's been my passion too. It's what I've done my whole life, and I was fortunate enough to grow up in southeast Iowa and deer hunt, and started archery hunting when I was probably 12, and I've taken it to the extreme level that we chase everything we can with our bow and arrows. And Wyatt, he took after me and loves the sport and loves the obsession of looking for deer horns and the respect of having the opportunity to go do it. It's something that we are blessed to get to do, and we love doing it. So, Wyatt told you a little bit earlier about this big horn we found. I found this on our family farm years ago, and unless you have it in your hands, you just don't realize what this thing is. It's a chunk of bone. It's heavy. I mean, it is, and it's got a little story behind it. When I found it, I had it at my folks' house, and when I went to go get it one time, I asked my dad, who's not with us anymore, and I said, "Dad, where's this big horn at?" And he said, "What horn?" And I said, "My great big horn." I said, "Where is it?" And he said, "Well, it's out in the garage." So I walk out in the garage, and I couldn't find it. And I come back in, and I said, "Dad, I can't find that horn. Where is it?" He says, "Hanging on the wall." And I said, "What do you mean it's hanging on the wall?" And so he took the liberty of taking a grinder, and he ground all the burr off and drilled a couple holes in it and had it nailed to the wall and had all of his extension cords hanging on it. So that's probably why I couldn't find it. But that being said, it is a magnificent, magnificent creature right here. So it's what we hunt for, to have the opportunity to harvest something like this. So like I said, I've done it my whole life, and it's a pleasure to watch my youngest son take it up and kind of follow in his father's footsteps. I'm getting older and is not as crazy about it as I used to be. I still love it, but
not as limber as you used to be.
Not as limber as I used to be either. No, but and I don't chase just whitetails. We've killed caribou. My passion now is moose hunting, as you can see over there on the wall. I've killed elk, all on public ground. Took me a lot of years to kill my first elk, but I did it all on my own with no help from nobody. So it was, to me, that's part of the hunt. So like I said before, moose hunting is my new passion. I've got a very dear friend that we go to Ontario every year when we could go to Ontario, and we fly in. We hunt with a place called Cashabowie Outpost. Brian and Fern up there are class act, and we have the pleasure of hunting with these gentlemen, and have done it for many years, and have harvested some very nice mature bulls there. So I've been fortunate enough to kill 8 moose with my bow, and I can't wait to get him up there, so that's
someday. That's
my next goal, is to get him up there and let him see what it's like to fly into the wilderness and no phones and no nothing, and experience it all, because I think that's why we all have the passion to do what we do. So that being said, it's good to see these younger generation take this up, because I think we need it in today's society, and just letting them have the passion that I've had for so long is just awesome, and it's great to see my son carried on. So, and I hope that one of these days I have grandchildren that'll carry it on too. So that's what I'm looking forward to. So
easy. I gotta have time to hunt.
Yeah.
I gotta have time to hunt these things.
You do pretty well for as young as you are. So
I'm lucky. I'm beyond lucky.
Yeah, we all are. We're all blessed. So.
Well, thanks for coming and hanging out, guys. This is the lodge. We're middle of shed season, so we're probably gonna go pick up some antlers. You guys should probably scoot.